Hey guys, and welcome back to the Sunday Cook with me, Anthony. I'm looking forward to showing you my favorite recipe for meatballs, served with some red rice and some mushrooms and vegetables. And I think it's safe to say that most cultures in the world have a form of meatball recipe. And this recipe was inspired by my Swedish meatballs, because well, that's what I fancied. So subscribe if you haven't yet for more recipes and more ideas. This is classic comfort food. So we start off with the mushrooms, which, by the way, never wash your mushrooms underwater, because they're like sponges, so they like to absorb lots and lots of moisture. So what you want to do is you want to get a brush and you want to gently brush any grime, any dirt residue from each of the mushrooms. So once you've done that, then they're ready to be finely sliced. And so for the full recipe and ingredients list, just check out our Facebook page where I've listed out the entire recipe in detail, as well as all of the ingredients. So I am slicing my mushrooms, and then the next job is to place them in a bowl and then keep them to one side. There you go. So once I've done that, it's time to get all my other ingredients prepped up. So I'm using a lot of garlic as usual, so I'm using 4 cloves of garlic here, and then I'm going to take my shallots and peel them, and then what you want to do is you want to finely dice them. I'm not too sure if you guys are interested in this, but if you want, if you're interested in a video on knife skills, just let me know in the comments box below, and if there is interest, then I will certainly create a video on knife skills. Just make sure that you don't forget to curl your fingers, because of course you don't want to end up chopping them off. You will need them for the rest of the recipe. So here I'm using half of my shallots for part of the recipe, and the other half is used for the actual meatballs. So always keep an array of bowls and dishes to keep things separated and kept together for all of the different components of the dishes that you need to be making. So in the bowl where I'm going to be creating the meatballs, I've added my garlic, half of the garlic, and the shallots. So I'm using a pack of ready-made organic sausages. They're a plain sausage with some sage, I think. But of course, you can use your own choices of sausage, whatever your heart desires. If you don't want to use a pork sausage, feel free to substitute it with, a turkey version or a chicken version. What you'll see later is I'm actually bulking up the meat content with some minced beef, so ground beef, and it's a 5% fat content ground beef, because the sausage meat already has quite a bit of fat content in it. I don't think I need to add. So in my mixing bowl, I'm adding my mince. So I've got here about 500 grams of ground lean beef mince. Then to that I'm gonna start adding my condiments and my herbs. So some sea salt, flaked sea salt, followed by, what do we have here? Some freshly cracked black pepper. Quite a lot of it. I like my flavors to be really punchy and really big. I think I have a palate that just yearns for that, so I tend to go for very strong flavors. I'm adding some sweet smoked paprika, about a heaped teaspoon, and then I'm gonna add on the rest. So I've got some dried thyme, and then I'm gonna add some dried oregano. I don't have much left, actually. That reminds me, I need to add that to my shopping list. Then I'm going to add on, I love this stuff. This stuff is really great. So, oh no, before I move on to the other spices, I'm adding the zest of 1 lemon. I just think that the lemon just brings out a little bit of brightness to the finished product. And after I've done that, I'm gonna crack an egg. And I think I'm gonna add some, no? Oh, okay. So you can actually add some more herbs and spices. I would suggest like onion salt, for example, or onion powder or garlic powder, just to enhance that flavor. But anyways, I am using my fingers to mix everything together thoroughly. You want the mince and the sausage meat to be thoroughly combined and to resemble kind of like a dough. So I'm using my hands for that. Clean hands, please. Wash your hands in between, especially because I've just handled some raw meat. And then on a lightly greased tray, I'm just forming little balls, and the balls are about the size of half of a golf ball, or maybe, yeah, half of a golf ball. And it shouldn't take very long. It takes about 5 minutes to create about, well, this recipe actually created 24 to be exact. So I was mentioning earlier that in a lot of countries there are different variations of meatballs, and I think that's something quite interesting actually, and I think I might even do some more research on that, maybe find a couple recipes from across the world. So I'm using red rice instead of normal rice. Of course you can serve your meatballs with anything else, you know, you can serve it with brown rice, maybe some pasta, or perhaps even omit all of that starch and just serve it with vegetables. The meatball is so, you know, you can do so much with it. So you can either serve it as I'm doing, or you can serve it in a stew. Sometimes I like to vary it if I don't want a starch, so I'll make a tomato-based stew with lots of peppers, maybe some courgettes, maybe some beans, like cannellini beans, and then I'll make a stew with some black olives, kind of give it that Mediterranean flavor. So now it's time to start browning what do we have? The meatballs. So in a deep kind of skillet, I'm using a tablespoon of canola oil, and I'm just browning my meatballs. So one trick, and most people don't really know this, but so you notice how sometimes meat tends to stick to the pan? So that could be because at times if you place your meat into the hot pan and you start to move it before it has had the chance to create a crust, that's when your meat is going to stick to your pan. So leave it for a bit until it starts to form a light crust, and then you'll be able to easily detach each meatball from the pan without destroying the shape. And eventually you'll be able to do this. You'll be able to toss your meatballs in the same pan without fearing that it will come apart and start, you know, making a nasty mess. So I've removed my meatballs from the pan, and I'm using the same pan. What I've done is I've actually drained the excess oil or fat, and I'm just adding a knob of butter, to which I'm gonna add my shallots and my vegetables. I've got a red chili in there and then some leeks, and I'm just going to sweat over a medium to high heat, constantly stirring to make sure that everything starts to sweat, becomes a little bit more tender, and I've actually added a drop of water just to deglaze, because By using the same pan, you actually have quite a lot of meat residue at the bottom of the pan, and that's all flavor, so you don't want to throw that away. You want to keep that and use it. I've then added some red peppers. They're the long variety. I actually need to work out what they're called because I can't remember what they're called, but they look like a very fat chili pepper. So they're long rather than round, and they're slightly sweet, and I love them. They're full of flavor. So this is actually going to create two things. So from that pan with all the vegetables, I'm going to then separate the vegetables into two portions. One portion is going to be turned into a sauce, and the other portion is going to have the mushrooms added, and then it's going to create an accompaniment. So I've also added I've added a teaspoon of what's it called? Of mustard. So you can use grainy mustard if you like that, that texture and that pop, but I've actually used a Dijon mustard. I then added a teaspoon of plain flour into one of the pans, and that's the pan that I'm using to create the sauce. And so I'm creating a bit of a roux. So a typical roux would have butter and flour. Then you cook it off for about 2 to 3 minutes to get that raw flavor out, and then you add milk. So here I've just added the flour directly to the vegetables that I'm using as a sauce. And now I'm just, and after I've put in the milk, I'm just blitzing it with my immersion blender, giving it a good whisk to just get rid of any final lumps. And that's pretty much my sauce ready. So I'm just adjusting the seasoning, and just make sure that you taste everything as you go. Here you have the remainder of the vegetables, which I'm leaving as they are. I've added my my meatballs back into that same pan, and I've just clamped a tray on top. I can't find the lid at the moment. I need to reorganize my kitchen again. And I'm letting them cook gently in the vegetables, and while I'm doing that, I think it's really good practice to clean as you go. Simply because you don't want to end up with a ton of dirty dishes to get through after you finished a nice relaxing meal, but also it keeps your clutter in the kitchen down. You see, I've got a really tiny kitchen with very small amounts of bench space, so I need to maximize every single inch of my counter space in order to cook. So I'm adjusting the seasoning, giving a final whisk to the sauce, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to be ready to dish up very shortly. So time to plate. So I'm really simple. I'm just serving it into a bowl, and in that bowl I'm adding the rice first, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little well, because I want my meatballs to sit in the middle of the bowl nice and snug. So I'm adding my meatballs. You can do like 4 or 5 per person. If you're really hungry, add a couple more. And then I'm adding the vegetables on top. Oh, clearly I was very hungry that day because I've added more. So I've got my vegetables on top, and then I'm just going to ladle the sauce. The sauce is rich, it's full of flavor, it's really unctuous, and yeah, like I said, it's a comfort dish. The perfect dish if it's been like really miserable outside, if you've had a stressful day, and yeah, it's just really satisfying. So I hope that you enjoyed this recipe, and there'll be plenty more recipes to come. Don't forget to subscribe if you liked this video. Add your comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to answer your questions. If you have any ideas for future videos, then please don't forget to add them in the comment box below. I'll always try and reply.